Morning, everybody. Happy Mondays, and welcome to the News Agenda. There he is, with me, Fleet Street Fox, and today I'm joined by the most dangerous man in the Westminster lobby, Mirror's politics correspondent, Mikey Smith.
Morning all.
I love your Twitter biography. It's just the best thing in the world. Now, we're going to give you the biggest stories of the day, discuss what they mean for you. We want you to get into the comments, ask us any questions you have about them, whatever's burning a hole in your head, and we will do our best to answer them for you. It's what we're here for. Now, are you an amber gambler? Apparently, 100,000 of us are jetting off to Spain this week, with 80 flights a day leaving the UK as tourists completely ignore the government advice not to do that, please. And this is despite the urgings of some very reliable and principled people like Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, Grant Shapps, and in due part, perhaps because people like the just as reliable and principled Michael O'Leary are offering very cheap flights. Now, Mikey, is this a case of like reverse psychology, where if they tell me not to, I am definitely going to be doing it? Or is it just that people have forgotten the lessons of fairly recent history, which was at this time, last summer, we all went to Spain and it seeded the autumn wave, which wrecked our Christmas?
I mean, a little of both, I think. I think the biggest problem is that people at the top of government, particularly Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, people like that, don't like telling people they can't do things. And therefore, they've decided in their infinite wisdom, which is exactly what happened, as you say, last year, they've decided to switch from saying you definitely can't go on holiday to please don't go on holiday. Which, I mean, if you're told please don't do something, you're not going to get sent to prison. You're not going to get fined for it.
Yeah, but please don't have the chocolate biscuit from the tin, because I'd be disappointed.
Exactly. So, yeah, it remains to be seen whether that strategy will work eventually, but it hasn't worked yet. It was moving the sort of the lockdown rules to please use your best judgment didn't go so well last year.
No, let's rely on common sense. That was the great British common sense, which appears to have evaporated quite significantly. Now, this has been handled pretty badly. Sage told Boris Johnson last May that his system of border quarantine wouldn't work unless he actually shut the borders and properly quarantined people in a government facility and tested them, not all this staying in a hotel and swanning about business. But, the traffic light system should mean amber means get ready. Doesn't mean go, right? You don't go on amber. And the tests are excruciatingly expensive. And I suppose at least the people that are going now, because it's term time, they're more likely to have been jabbed, right? They haven't got children, they're not families. They're more likely to be older. So perhaps a bit safer.
Perhaps, yeah. But I mean, I've never been a terribly good driver. But yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people will start accelerating on amber because they know they're not going to get in trouble for it. But yeah, no, I wouldn't be leaving the country for any of the amber countries just yet. Mainly because I'd get into trouble when I came back because I wouldn't be able to leave the house for 10 days. But I can understand why people, if they're vaccinated and if they're going to somewhere like Spain, which isn't doing too bad, but it's still amber, I can understand why you sort of build up the calculus of risk, as Tony Blair would say, and come down on the side of, I don't mind spending 10 days indoors if it means I can spend 10 days on the beach. But yeah, it remains to be seen what the impact of that's going to be when people return.
William says, what's the point of closing our borders if this madness means that you can just walk in and out? Because the problem isn't just someone who's jabbed going to Spain. It's the fact that Spain has opened its borders to Britain and to other places. So those third countries could be they could be our red list countries, but you could be going to Spain and mixing with people from another country that you're not supposed to be mixing with. And then potentially, say, if you have got children that are or anyone in your family is unvaccinated, bringing in a whole new variant for us all to enjoy, which is suboptimal, isn't it?
Well, I mean, exactly. I mean, there's an argument I've been having with the Department of Health this week, and if anyone from the Department of Health is watching, I'm going to call you again this afternoon.
I love it having an argument with the government department. It's best fun.
Well, it's about when and why India was put on the red list finally, and they keep changing their story about why, for example, Bangladesh and Pakistan were put on the red list on a particular date, and India was not put on the red list on that particular date. It's entirely coincidental, by the way, that the Prime Minister was planning a visit to India during the period when it wasn't put on the red list.
Headline. Yeah, that's nothing to do with it.
But they keep coming out with these figures that, you know, there were 3 times more people arriving in Heathrow from Bangladesh and Pakistan and testing positive than there were from India, which, according to the published figures, is nonsense. And they still won't tell me which day they were talking about. But it seems like, you know, they found half an hour where more people were coming with positive tests from other countries than from India. So yeah, I'm having that argument with them, and I'll let you know how it goes. But it's not going well so far. They're currently telling me absolutely nothing.
No, Department of Health, just almost as good as the Ministry of Defence. Now, Angelique says, where's the test money going? How come in Europe PCR tests are €46 and the UK it's at least twice as much, often 3 or 4 times that price? Yet France is doing them for free, I understand. They're dirty socialists. And here in the UK, it's private enterprise, and it's up to like 400 quid a test for some private providers that will come to your house and administer for you. What's going on, Mikey?
Well, there are some that will cost you 400 quid. There are some that are significantly cheaper than that. I think sort of 80 quid you can get them. But that, if you're a family of 4 going on holiday and you have to get them when you leave, when you arrive, when you come back, then that adds up. It obviously adds up.
Yeah, it's a couple of grand.
Yeah, and I mean, power to you if you've got that kind of money and you really want to go on holiday. Then power to you. But we aren't yet in a position, apparently, in this country where we can offer PCR testing on demand.
Bin man's outside.
Oh, I see.
Unauthorised ingress onto the property. Yeah. So now Sue says, Hancock says the vaccine works on the Indian variant. Scientists are saying you need 2 doses for it to work. So they want to delay the next stage of opening, but Hancock's sending out the wrong message. It does work to 60% in the case of AstraZeneca, isn't it?
Yeah. Basically, from the numbers I was looking at yesterday, it's about 20% less effective if you've only had 1 jab with the Pfizer, and the numbers are slightly different with AstraZeneca, but they're roughly comparable. And it's I think about 88% effective with 2 jabs, which is roughly comparable to the Kent variant, except that there's not quite enough information. I don't think they've got quite enough data to be certain on the 2 jabs thing yet. But that didn't stop them press releasing it on Saturday afternoon. There was a really interesting thing on Saturday. So we were expecting the figures on this from Public Health England on Thursday, and we got nothing on Thursday. We were told they were coming on Friday. Didn't turn up on Friday. On Saturday, Department of Health puts out a press release with all the good bits of the data embargoed until 10:30 at night. And then at 10:30, Public Health England released all the data, including a fairly troubling risk assessment right in the middle of Eurovision. On 10:30 on a Saturday night, which is not a common time for people to release data. So yeah.
Is this being handled by Department of Health actual government press officers or the advisors, the SPADs?
That's a very good question, which I asked them yesterday and then did not get a good answer.
Because
so I asked them.
Yeah, the government press officers have a code of conduct they have to adhere to, and the SPADs don't.
And also, Public Health England is, in theory, its own body, its own agency, and it's really unclear why they're delaying potentially. I asked them this question, they didn't answer it either. Why they're, possibly, it looks like they're delaying the release of information to coincide with government press releases. That isn't how it should work, and they certainly shouldn't be delaying them to drop while everyone's watching Eurovision
No.
in the middle of the
You know
night.
what?
It's really weird.
I wish the DCMS Select Committee, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which spends so much time scrutinising journalists, would perhaps spend some of its government funding, state funding, scrutinising the work of Parliament, the work of government, talking to journalists and the way they mistreat them. That would be nice. Oliver Dowden, if you're listening. Now, it's also worth saying some people are going on holiday because they had a holiday from last year that was cancelled. It's rolled over. It doesn't cancel anymore. They're not getting refunds. They kind of feel they have to go, perhaps. And also, if you go to an amber list country, your travel insurance is invalid these days. So
yes,
go carefully. Don't fall over. Don't break a leg. Don't get drunk. Anyway, Tracy says, Virgin are charging £152 per person, and there are 5 of us. We're meant to be going to Florida in August. That is an insane price. And you would have thought that, last question, Mikey, but why isn't the government paying for the tests if they want us to go on holiday and support the travel industry? At least the green list countries, if they paid for tests for green list, you'd be less likely to go on amber list, you'd have thought. And B, why aren't they grounding the flights to countries they don't want us to go to? Why are they letting Ryanair offer £5 flights to an amber list country?
It goes back to what I was saying earlier. They don't want to tell people what to do. It's as
government.
I know, but they're conservatives. They're libertarians. They don't want to tell people what they can and can't do. It's sort of baked in.
But they've spent a year telling us not to cuddle, who not to go to bed with a lover who lives across the county line, And
imagine how uncomfortable that must have been for them.
But by now.
Yeah, I think what they're doing is they're doing a calculation of how much they can tell people not to do and how much people will do anyway. But whether that's the right calculation is another story.
Exactly. Well, perhaps they should just put the amber list countries on the blue and red list like they're supposed to. Sandra says, morning, Sandra. My son and family have been living and working in Thailand. They want to come home this year. Of course they do. Been away for a year in a pandemic. Can't get a vaccine in Thailand. How can he come home? What rules must he follow? If Thailand's a red list country, I know Vietnam is. I don't know whether Thailand is. I assume it's probably amber or red. He's got to follow the basic rules. There you go. On-screen journalism for you, Sandra. Being done for you. If he's a red list country, he's got to come back. He's got to quarantine. He's got to take all the tests and have his family. And amber, he's got to take the test and have a shorter period of isolation. I think I'm right in saying. But he would have to have a test before he left Thailand. He would have to take a PCR test to show that he was clear in order to get a flight. If there are flights coming from Thailand, of course. That's the other thing. You're dependent upon whether the planes are actually leaving. Mikey,
currently, Thailand doesn't appear to be on the red list, so that makes it slightly easier and a lot cheaper because it means you don't have to pay for the hotel stay. I'm just double checking if it's on the amber list. List. Bear with.
And if it is on the amber list, then it's just going to be a case of some tests before he leaves, some tests when he gets here, and then a short period of isolation at home. In theory, of course, if he did test positive, then there'd be other issues.
Thailand,
but I'm sure
it's on the amber list. So
list. There you go. Easier rules, Sandra.
Yeah, easier rules. And you don't have to have a vaccine to fly. You just have to have a negative test before you get on the flight.
And he can get the vaccine when he's here, probably. So,
yeah.
Especially if you go to Bolton, just walk up. And they'll happily stick you in the arms, not a problem.
They're doing one end of my road. They're doing a drop-in vaccine centre at the end of my road.
Okay, all round at Mikey's then. There you go.
Yeah.
Problem solved. Thank you very much for explaining that, Mikey. And thank you for your questions, everybody. If you've got anything else you want to ask us, are you going away this summer? Do you have to? Do you want to? Is it essential? Is it a pre-booked thing that's rolled over that you have no choice perhaps about taking? I had one of these the other day, a thing that had been rolled over from last year, and suddenly the price had gone up and I had to pay the extra bit because travel insurance didn't cover cancelling it, and I already paid for 2/3 of it. So there we go. They managed to sting me. But let's move on to the next story, which is going to be the biggest story of the week. I'm not sure this is good news or bad news, but a year ago, Mr. Dominic Cummings was in the Downing Street Rose Garden doing a comedy turn as Mr. Magoo on a day trip to Barnard Castle. And this week, on Wednesday, he's going to be in Parliament destroying his former boss and total frenemy, Boris Johnson. So, Mikey, what is he going to tell us? Has he actually let the cat out of the bag already?
I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Alien versus Predator, but the tagline was "Whoever wins, we lose." So
From dripped acid.
Number 10 is bracing itself because I don't know if you remember when Dominic Cummings left Number 10, there was this famous photo of him carrying this giant box.
It's quite a small box, kind of box I had when I took redundancy from the Mirror. Just, bottle of vodka and a few toys. I
mean, you could put 3-4 reams of documents in there. So, yeah. and this is allegedly what he has. He has a bunch of documents from the decision making right at the beginning of the pandemic, and he has. I urge you not to read them because they're dull and long. But he's done blogs and a lot of tweets. He's found Twitter, which is something. But he's done a lot of tweets in recent days, basically outlining in his head all of the mistakes the government made in the first sort of couple of months of the pandemic. The main thing he's going for is that the government, the original plan, the original strategy was one of herd immunity. And these are a couple of words that come up quite a lot, and it's and ministers are denying that this was ever the strategy. But I think it depends on what you mean by herd immunity. What he explained yesterday was that the plan was to manage the amount of the virus going through the country, but not to stop it. So to slightly bring
right, we won't have. Well, having campaigned against freedom of movement, we're going to let viruses have freedom of movement.
Partly that, but there is a scientific basis for it, which is that if you allow the virus to go through the country all in one chunk at the beginning, then you don't get a second wave right around winter when the NHS is under pressure anyway.
No, because everyone's dead by then.
Well, this is what people rapidly worked out, is that the upshot of this was watching over a fairly short period of time, hundreds of thousands of people, in Cummings' words, choking to death, and the dead going unburied is what he said yesterday. And at some point, while they were working through this strategy, someone panicked and decided this would be a comms nightmare. And the words herd immunity. Yeah. Oh no, that was the problem. The messaging was going to be difficult. People had caught onto this idea of herd immunity and worked out that it meant that lots and lots and lots of people were going to die over a very short period of time in order to protect the rest of the country for 6 months hence. So that's the big argument he's going to be making. There are some other small arguments which I think are worth delving into a little bit. My favourite of which is that we all know that Boris Johnson skipped 5 Cobra meetings right at the beginning of the pandemic when the virus was first taking its hold on the country. What we don't know, and what it's thought Cummings might claim, I couch that because Number 10 have said this is, quote, total nonsense. But it's claimed that when Boris Johnson, because Boris disappeared for a couple of weeks from about the 14th of February to the end of the month, and I was covering him at the time, and the first time he popped his head up again was to shake his donation tin at the Black and White Ball, which, if you haven't read the stories about that, please do, they're amazing. So but he disappeared for those 2 weeks, and apparently what he was doing in those 2 weeks and previous to that is working on a book about Shakespeare, which he had been contracted to do and had the advance for about 5 years. And if he he hadn't written a word. It's claimed he hadn't written a word, and he had to keep the advance of this. He had to not pay the advance back to the publishers because he needed to pay for his divorce, which was apparently quite expensive.
And that's the claim. He had to have, because instead of writing the book, he'd been having an affair.
Yeah, that's the one.
It's going to be a really good book if it's written in a fortnight, isn't it?
Well, this is what's really interesting. On one of the days he was not at a Cobra meeting, 5th of February. He did one of his People's PMQs things, a Facebook Live thing. And I found the footage of this yesterday. And if you watch it, at one point he runs out of questions to answer. It was one of the first ones they did. They hadn't really got the format down, and he ran out of questions. So to vamp, he just went on this extended and entirely unprompted monologue about William Shakespeare's relationship with Elizabeth I, talking about Shakespeare plays, just like 2 or 3 minutes of this, of just him talking about Shakespeare, possibly suggesting that it was what was on his mind at the time, I think. But yeah, no, he was clearly, he had the bard on the brain at the time.
This is February, the end of February. This is a month after the first recorded case of COVID had arrived in the UK on January the 31st.
And not particularly long after he had to go to hospital, before he had to go to hospital.
Only a month or two, yeah. And it's about 7 months since he actually shut down the pandemic planning committee. I can't remember if that's around the time that WHO actually declared it was a pandemic, but we were certainly aware that China was up to something. I remember reading reports about China in Wuhan was bulldozing roads so people couldn't get out. And up to that point, like everybody else, I was going, oh, it's just the Wu flu, whatever, it doesn't matter. When I read that they're actually bulldozing the roads to stop people leaving, I was like, oh my God, that's the zombie apocalypse. You don't do that for a cold. You do that when there's zombies. You do that when it's Army of the Dead, right? And started getting a little bit more concerned. And
it wasn't long after that. It wasn't long after that in this country that I had sources telling me that like hazmat suits were being handed out to medical staff, and they'd lost track of we already had the first cases in the country, and we were starting to lose track of how many there were and where they'd come from. This is around that sort of period, and
we actually switched off the
test.
Yeah, and we actually switched off the testing because there are too many cases to test, which is like turning off the radar because there's too many planes in the Luftwaffe.
Well, the other thing he's going to claim is that the reason we didn't do the heavy testing right at the beginning is because they were going for this herd immunity strategy. There's no point testing people if you want the virus to go through the country. The other added advantage of a herd immunity strategy is if you get immunity in the community from having had the disease.
That's a good band name.
It is. If you get that from people having actually had the disease, you don't have to spend billions of pounds on vaccines.
No, but of course, everybody who might be vulnerable to it is dead.
Yes.
And the whole point of herd immunity is the herd protects the weakest ones who haven't had the vaccine. Vaccines provide herd immunity. Letting everybody catch it is manslaughter. It's not herd immunity.
The other thing to bear in mind when you listen to Dominic Cummings talk, obviously, this is the guy who went on a jolly to. Well, I say went on a jolly. He took his family to Durham in the middle of it. So there's a certain amount of. Okay, you're saying we should have locked down earlier, but you ignored the lockdown anyway. Yeah. The other thing is that there was a widely circulated quote that he apparently said at a private function at the time, which was along the lines of, the strategy is herd immunity, and if a few pensioners die, so be it. He has strongly denied having said this, but
he could arguably, though, have said that while talking about someone else's stupid idea as well.
Yeah,
but as Mike pointed out in the comment there, came down, that it's a bit galling to hear Dominic Cummings, who was ostensibly in charge of running an awful lot of the country, because let's face it, Boris Johnson wasn't doing it, probably still isn't, sit there and complain about the decisions that were made. So, I mean, is anyone actually going to believe him if he comes out and says this stuff?
Alien versus Predator. That's my answer to that. Whoever wins, we lose. It's bad guys fighting each other, which is, I say bad guys. Sorry, that's a judgment. But it's always fun to watch people have a scrap, but always sort of bear in mind that these were the people who were. I mean, Dominic Cummings was the most senior advisor at the time. If he thought at the time that this was so bad, why didn't he do anything to stop it?
Yeah, I'd love to hear. if Boris Johnson actually managed to overrule Dominic Cummings, because I think that's very unlikely to have happened. Now, keep asking your questions, everybody. Are you going on holiday? Do you want to go on holiday? Do you want to not go on holiday? Are you worried about the cost of the tests? Are you going to be an amber gambler and say, stuff Boris Johnson, I shall do what I damn well please? I mean, we do have some good news to get to, but first of all, I just want to have one quick question more about Dominic Cummings, Mikey. When he goes in there and says whatever he says, an alien and predator scrap it out, or, you know, Mr. Magoo and a walking laundry hamper have a fight. Is it actually going to make any difference to the way the government is perceived to have handled this pandemic? Because if you like them, you've got no problem with their handling of it. It's very difficult, it's unprecedented, blah, blah. And if you don't like them, then they're obviously evil killers. Is that going to change?
Well, I mean, Dominic Cummings thinks it is. He is friends of Dominic Cummings, and to be honest, he doesn't have a lot of friends who talk to the media anyway. But friends of Dominic Cummings are saying that he's going in there with the express intention of taking Boris out. That's his. He wants revenge. He wants to bury Boris Johnson in this. Napalm is the word that was used. But Boris Johnson isn't, as we've said many times on previous occasions, he isn't like other politicians. You can't shame him into resigning. The public still have affection for him, or a lot of the public still have affection for him, despite all of the manifestly, let's say, unparliamentary things he's done. He's done previously.
If Theresa May had done any of the stuff that Boris Johnson's done, she'd have been out in a long time ago.
It's and we've yet to see the thing that buries Boris Johnson. It's possible that Cummings might have something like that he hasn't shown us yet. But he says he's got these documents that lay the whole thing bare. And if nothing else, it'll be a good rehearsal for the inevitable inquiry, which is going to happen eventually when they get around to it.
Yeah, okay. I reckon it's going to be curtains that bury Boris Johnson, just because the most ridiculous thing is bound to be the thing that buries the most ridiculous Prime Minister.
Well, that's the other thing that might come up, because they had conversations about the curtains. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a case of, and the stories that are breaking over the weekend about Boris Johnson literally being fed by party donors now, having thousands of pounds worth of food couried to him. But what's happened to his diet? That's a whole other Facebook Live. The diet he went on after coming out of hospital, the man still consists entirely of cheese, judging from him. He's not in a new suit. He's not lost anything. He arguably looks a lot more haggard, but
spends hundreds of pounds a month on a celebrity personal trainer as well.
It's not working, mate. It's not working. I'll give you a workout. Come on here, I'll get you running about. Now, we do have some. Thank you for your questions, everybody. Thank you for explaining that, Mikey. We're going to clean up some more of your questions about travel and holidays and so on at the end. But we do have a bit of good news, coronavirus-wise, and here it is. Man's best friend has come through for us yet again. Tests have shown that trained sniffer dogs can detect COVID in 94% of cases, even the asymptomatic ones, even people with a low viral load, and they have no difference in being able to detect the new variants as well. No need for a new test or a new dog. Fido will do it for you. Perhaps we should have them at passport control, and we could stop giving mates of government ministers £2,000 a time for a family round of tests. What do you reckon, though, Mikey? I mean, Test and Trace cost us £37 billion, didn't it? Why don't Rex only wants a bone? Why doesn't the government give him a contract?
I mean, this all looks fantastic and certainly cheaper than getting tests done. The one thing I can't shake from my head is, I mean, the 6%.
Look, don't pick holes.
but also that one day I'm going to be coming back from the shops and I'm going to have a string of sausages and a really nice ribeye in my bag, and suddenly I'm going to have to self-isolate for 10 days.
These are trained dogs, and it's the same as you go for police sniffer dogs that you see around the place. You don't go up and give them a fuss. They're working and they know exactly what they're doing. And I would far rather have a test that had a waggy tail at the end of it than I would.
Do you have them roaming the streets? Do you have them in?
Just let them
Presumably
out.
you have them in airports.
Let them into the community. Let it rip.
Let
Let
Rover
all the
rip.
dogs out. Sorry.
Yeah. Fantastic breakthrough in science. I think there was an episode of House along these lines, wasn't there? It might have been a cat.
Dogs can detect cancer. It's been proven. So, I mean, they're the best thing in the whole wide world. Everybody should get a dog. Down with cats. Hazel Beresford Moore. Good morning, Hazel. I've had both the vaccines. The first one was Pfizer on the 21st of December. The second one was AstraZeneca. Oh, we've mixed it up. Cocktail in you on the 2nd of March. I take it this is a normal thing. You've got your 12 weeks inside your 12 weeks, looks like. It shouldn't matter if you have Pfizer and AstraZeneca. In fact, some people have said that may be better to have. It increases your efficacy of your vaccines, don't they, Mikey?
I don't think it's super unusual. I think it wasn't the plan to start with, but I think they give you what they've got stock of.
Exactly. And if it's doing something very slightly different but pretty much the same, then it's just broadening your spectrum of possibilities, I would have thought. D says, is it true that you might have another lockdown? Sage has said third wave after the measures are released on June, haven't they? They've talked about July and August, and of course last September, October it went, but we've got the vaccines now. So what's the likelihood, Mikey?
I don't. Famous last words. I don't think it's likely we'll have another full lockdown on the same scale as we've had previously, because, as you say, we've got something like 76% of the country have had their first jab. If you look at the numbers of who is transmitting the virus currently, particularly with the India variant, it tends to be younger people or older people who are eligible for the jab who just haven't had it. With the younger people, it's less likely that they're going to have serious illness, although it's not certain that they won't have long-term effects. But I think the key thing that they're going to keep drilling home is that a good chunk of the reason the India variant is spreading is because some people who can have the jab aren't getting the jab, and it's spreading among those people.
But that claim was based on 19 people in Bolton Royal Infirmary, wasn't it? And 2/3 of them were eligible and hadn't had it or something.
Yeah.
So
but we did get this data on Saturday night. I squinted through my Eurovision haze to read it, but there is some positive stuff in there that maybe the India variant has a bit of an effect where it's not quite where the vaccines aren't quite as effective on it, but it seems like with 2 jabs it's mostly as effective as the previous vaccine, the previous variants. So I think it's unlikely that we'll have another lockdown. Whether the bonfire of the masks that's supposed to happen on June the 21st is going to go ahead on June the 21st, that's another question.
I'm not burning my mask. I'm keeping it for future use.
This is it. I fully intend to, every time I even have a runny nose, I'm going to be putting a mask on.
Yeah, if I ever go into London again, every time I go in the tube, mask up, right?
I'm on the central line. I'm on the central line. That thing at the best of times.
At least it's not the Hammersmith and Itty.
I remember that one fondly.
Now, Rum says, with all that's taken place, this is a nice place to end. With all that's taken place during the pandemic, the mixed messages, the blunders in setting up testing, not using Fido, how can he survive this? I assume he's talking about Boris. He has been absorbed. He's basically, if we're talking about Predator and Alien, so close to Predator, talking about Editors and Aliens, he's like the Terminator 2.0, isn't he? He just kind of melts down to mercury and then reforms again, or like a sponge. He's more like a sponge, the bottom of a tropical reef, or a melted cheese. What could? Let's move this on to Cummings and that on Wednesday. The Mirror's going to be doing a lot of coverage on this. What could possibly take Boris Johnson's knees out from under him? How bad would it have to be?
I don't know. This is the thing we don't know. We don't know what will take him out. That we constantly for the past 5 years we've been expecting him to be taken out by this latest scandal, whatever it was. The closest thing to actually doing him some damage in the polls was Dominic Cummings. That's the thing that got people in the country really angry, and that's because we were all in the middle of a lockdown and we couldn't leave the house, and he did. And
he didn't get fired.
And he didn't get fired, and it all went away.
So if Cummings
and now they're double-digit points clear in the polls.
Yeah, if Cummings comes out and in theory says something like, "Boris told me to go. Boris told me it was fine. Boris told me he'd been to see his mum," or whatever, that might rock the boat.
I mean, it might. My understanding is that Boris didn't know he was going until he was there. So
is he writing a book, mate? We already know anything. Yeah, the Prime Minister. He's only paid 150 grand a year for knowing what's going on.
I think possibly the thing with Boris is that a lot of people will put things down to good-natured incompetence with Boris rather than malevolence. And if there's anything that maybe suggests malevolence, then that might move the needle a little bit. But I think there's enough people in the country that will put things down to good-natured incompetence.
Right. So unless
people can relate to, I guess,
unless some kind of giant space lizard actually comes out of his mouth and starts eating someone's face.
I mean, I would imagine them to lose a couple of points in the polls if that happens. Yeah.
I don't know. I quite like to watch it. All right. Thank you, Mikey, for joining me. Thank you for your questions, everybody. Tune in to the Mirror's coverage of the Cummings showdown in Parliament on Wednesday. They'll be streaming it live here, I'm sure. And we will discuss it on the next edition of the News Agenda on Wednesday morning, when I'm sure Mr. Cummings will have given us a few more tidbits and breadcrumbs to discuss before he goes in there. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.